Hey guys, welcome back to Paint Every Day. Today I'm going to be showing you how to build these ruined walls. You can use them for D&D or tabletop war games, either fantasy or sci-fi, depending on what you're playing. And believe it or not, these are actually made out of styrofoam. So the real secret ingredient is heat. So you can use a heat gun like this to melt and shape the foam. You can also use it to hide the bubbly texture so it looks less like styrofoam, and you can trick your players into thinking you made this out of some other material. And also it'll give us this nice hard shell. That'll make it nice and durable, and it will last a long time on the gaming table. Okay, so we got all that coming up today, so strap in and let's get started. Alright, so for this build you're just going to need some regular styrofoam that you can get in packages, or you can buy some in bulk at your local hardware store. This stuff can be cut with just a plain old Olfa knife pretty easily, or you can use a Proxxon for this, and I do have one, but it was hard to deal with the pieces this big, so I just used the knife. Now the downside with the knife is that it does make a big mess, so I would recommend having a vacuum or a shop vac on hand if you do this yourself. I also beveled the edges of the structures to give them a more interesting look. I just looked for shapes in the styrofoam that looked interesting, and I let those inspire me, and I went from there. For some sections I used multiple pieces of styrofoam, so I had to use some hot glue to attach them together. This one I made to look like a ruined bunker that models could hide in and get some cover. Overall, I made a medieval-esque wall, another of a similar aesthetic, the bunker, which I mentioned earlier, and a gate, which all had places for minis to stand and have some cover. Next, I moved on to using the heat gun. The one I'm using has an adjustable heat and power, so I was able to find out what worked best for the foam. Now, this didn't quite make a smooth surface, but it did hide the bubbly styrofoam texture. Later, I will show you how to make this texture less defined and dramatic. One of the nicest things about using the heat gun is that the foam melts and condenses, and it leaves a really nice hard surface that is perfect for painting, and it's really durable. Also, if you just want it absolutely smooth, then you can just sand the surfaces of these walls. Anyway, I just went over all the wall sections with the heat, taking care to melt some areas more than others to look like cracks or craters. Remember how earlier I said I had a way to make the texture less dramatic on this styrofoam? Well, here it is. You're just going to want to add some PVA glue to the walls and then sprinkle on some baking soda. This will fill in a lot of the major cracks and give the walls a nice gritty texture. Using a very soft brush to brush away any excess baking soda can be very helpful, and it can help you get it into any cracks you missed. It took a while, but I did this on every single surface of the walls. After that, I sealed all that in with the classic black paint and Mod Podge mix to make sure the baking soda stuck. Now, if you want to make a more natural stone look, you can use the black base coat like me, but if you are going for a concrete look, I would definitely recommend going a lot lighter. I probably should have done this because I wanted these to be more sci-fi oriented terrain for like Warhammer 40k, but they still look good, and they can be used for both. Next, I moved on to painting. For the painting, it was mostly dry brushing. I started with a dark gray, going for a bit more coverage, and as I lightened the colors, I also reduced the amount of coverage and the amount of paint on the brush. Now, as I mentioned before, the contrast with the black base coat and the gray dry brush doesn't really look like concrete. But I still tried putting on a black wash to try to dull down the colors. It didn't work out. Oh well, I just decided that these could be used for both fantasy or sci-fi games. The painting wasn't really anything special, but I really stepped up the look of these walls with the weathering. First, I decided to add some blast marks to really accentuate all the cracks and craters on the walls. You could use black pigments for this, or you could just go the cheap route and use some charcoal from the fireplace. I just scratched it on and it looked great. I'm definitely going to use this technique in the future. Shout out to Bardscraft for introducing it to me. After that, I add some moss to make these walls look ancient and overgrown. In my mind, these were used in some long-forgotten war and had been sitting in the elements for many years. Yes, they still had craters and scars from many battles, but the nature had overgrown them, adding some greenery and life to an otherwise desolate landscape. To make the moss, I just used the same recipe as in my graveyard fence video, and I mixed PVA glue, water, and fine turf together until it was thick enough to spread. I then applied that with an old brush to the walls. I tried to pick out cracks and crevices and places where water might deposit and moss might grow. Speaking of water, I added some water stains with a brown wash. This is an easy way to add some more visual interest to boring, flat wall sections. My advice for this is to 1. Look for places where water might flow from, and 2. Apply it thicker than you think. The wash is a lot less noticeable when it's dry than when it's wet. Next, I added some grass tufts to various areas of the walls. This made these walls look a lot more old and overgrown. In some places I added too much glue, so I added just some fine turf to hide it. By the way, my PVA glue was kind of acting weird and it wasn't drying clear, so it just looked kind of weird on the walls. Let me know in the comments if this has ever happened to you and why. It could be that the glue is reacting to something else, or it was just too old. Finally, to finish off the weathering, I added some mud stains to the bottom edges of the walls. I've seen friends use this technique on their terrain, and it really helps tie in the terrain with the rest of the scenery on the table. I just dabbed on some brown paint and wiped away most of it with my finger. It's a subtle effect, but I think it adds a lot of realism and depth. And as a last minute addition, I added some boards to cover up some of the holes where I melted the foam too much. I was imagining that maybe, over the years, scavengers and soldiers have added their own makeshift additions to these ruins. This is just coffee stir sticks, strong tone, and then a tan dry brush. Alright guys, that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this project and you were able to follow steps along with me and possibly make your own cool little wall. I'm not even sure what to call these anymore. Wall sections, bunkers, broken down barricades, whatever you want. Remember, you can customize these however you like. And so I just hope this project was just helpful, encouraging, or maybe just generally interesting for you. Anyway, that's it for today, so make sure you go like and subscribe if you liked it. Turn on the notification bell so you can catch more terrain projects like this coming up on the channel. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. In the meantime, do yourself a favor and paint every day. Honestly, it really helps, guys.